Today we're going to talk about the fossil and coal record. We're going to do a little bit of review. Which one is real science? Must the data conform to the theory? If it does not, adjust or ignore the data? Or must the theory conform to the data? If it does not, adjust or abandon the theory. And I think we've all seen that the latter one is real science, and the former one, unfortunately, is very prevalent, but not real science. Another review, uniformitarianism is the belief that all processes have worked the way they do now, gradually over a long period of time instead of in compressed periods. Again, reviewing an example of uniformitarianist thinking. This man is walking at 3 miles per hour. His house is 60 miles away. So the uniformitarianist conclusion is, therefore, he has been walking for 20 hours. But did he come from his house? Did he run some of the way? Did he hitchhike part of the distance? Did he stop to rest along the way? That would give answers in a different direction. Is he tired now and walking at a different speed? So you can see that uniformitarianist conclusions ignore a lot of very real possibilities and therefore are not as sure as they would like you to believe they are. And the last thing in review is that evolution and creation both are religious beliefs. But the purpose of these videos is to decide which one fits the data best and looking at it from a scientific angle. Let's talk about fossils. When a creature dies, normally there's no fossils that are going to be produced. The creature might be eaten, and of course there's no fossils then. The creature dies and is eaten by scavengers, and there's still no fossils. Or the creature dies and decomposes, and there's no fossils. The only way fossils happen is when a creature is buried quickly. And there are 5 different kinds of fossils. You have preserved remains, you have permineralization, you have a mold or a cast, and replacement, and then you have compression. Basically, permineralization and replacement are very similar, and permineralization means that organic material remains and only some of the body's tissues are replaced by minerals, whereas replacement means all of the body tissues have been replaced by minerals. Mold or cast would be like footprints that are preserved, and a lot of things like ferns and leaves are saved as compression fossils. What does the fossil record really show? But first, we're going to go for a little story. A traveler once came into a charming Swiss village. A fine clock tower was in the center of that village, and all the villagers set their watches by the time that the tower gave. Impressed, the traveler went to talk to the keeper of the clock tower. "How do you know that your clock has the right time?" The clockmaster said, "That is easy. On the hill, a cannon goes off every evening at exactly 6 p.m. I reset the clock tower each day from that." Intrigued, the traveler went to talk to the man on the hill. "How do you know the right time to set off your cannon every evening?" "That is easy," said the cannon master. "Every day I go down to the village. There is a wonderful clock tower there. I reset my watch every day at noon from that clock." Can you see the problem with this? This is something called circular reasoning. So the clock and the tower are resetting their time according to each other. Neither one knows if they have the correct time. It's a problem. This is what's known as a fallacy of logic, and circular reasoning is one of those fallacies of logic. When one assumes the same statement as both the premise and the conclusion, and there's no new information or justification introduced. A is true because of B, B is true because of A. And you can see that there's a problem with that. So how does this apply to fossils? Well, here's the question. How do geologists determine the age of strata? And this is how they do it. The fossils are dated by the strata that they're found in, and the strata are dated by the fossils found in them. Can you see the problem with this? This is circular reasoning. Now, I was giving an earlier version of this presentation clear back in 1978 at the University of Prince Edward Island at a youth conference. And when I got to this point, one of the the adult chaperone said, "Did you know that we have a professional geologist here with us today?" And I thought, "Oh boy, uh, he's gonna tear me apart on this." So I asked him. I said, "Have I misstated this statement about the fossils are dated by the strata and the strata is dated by the fossils?" And he was quiet for a little while, and there was a really uncomfortable silence for a little while. And he says, "No, you got it right. That's how we do it." So I thought, wow, how can they be so gullible as to do that? Because these are people that have been trained, that have PhDs, that are professional scientists, and yet they can't see the illogic of this very basic premise that they're using in geology, and they do use it. Circular reasoning, here's Wikipedia's definition, and we'll go to the highlighted part. The argument becomes a matter of faith and fails to persuade those that don't already accept it. There is no reason to accept the premises unless one already believes the conclusion, or that the premises provide no independent ground or evidence for the conclusion. That's what circular reasoning is, and unfortunately, fossils and geology are caught in this circular reasoning conundrum. It's really one of the big weaknesses of their science. Why are fossils found in different strata? Doesn't that prove that they lived in different ages? And this is an argument people quite often use. We see that human fossils and dinosaur fossils and trilobite fossils, for instance, might be found in different strata. But think about this. If our world were destroyed today by successive colossal tsunamis, would you expect to find the remains of rabbits, alligators, and humans in the same flood deposit? No, you wouldn't, because they don't live together. So it's a spurious argument. So which one is more credible? Fossils are dated by the strata that they're found in. Strata are dated by the fossils that are found in them. No, that's patently a circular reasoning and cannot hold up. Or there is no independent way to date strata and no concrete proof of ages of millions of years. Eh, that one actually is more credible. So another question. Can soft tissues really be 66 to 252 million years old? Well, there's an American paleontologist at the University of North Carolina State, and she has discovered soft tissues in a number of dinosaur fossils. It says here she discovered blood, and notice this is from the Smithsonian Magazine, so it's not like a creationist argument. This is the Smithsonian Magazine stating this. Discovered blood vessels and structures that look like whole cells inside that T-Rex bone. And as any textbook will tell you, when an animal dies, soft tissues such as blood vessels, muscle, and skin decay and disappear over time, while hard tissues like bone may gradually acquire minerals from the environment and become fossils. Well, this wasn't just a one-time find. She has found lots of these things. And blood vessels, blood cells, collagen, soft tissue in hundreds of dinosaur fossils. So this is now a regular thing that's being found. But we're told that these are 66 million years old. And Mary Schweitzer herself believes that they are that old. How is this possible? Well, the evolutionist rescue argument is there was some sort of biocontamination or geological toasting, which means somehow these things got preserved by some sort of geological toasting process. But that doesn't explain the soft, stretchy tissues, and the evidence for preservation models is not visible for things that are really that old. It doesn't hold up. Here's another argument that the evolution says that the right conditions could produce what they call shielding polymers that would preserve tissues. The problem with that is that the environments of the fossils don't match those conditions, and such polymers are of a different color and quality than those that are observed. So that doesn't wash. Here's still another evolutionist rescue argument. The soft tissues are really biofilm made by bacteria entering the sample from outside. The problem is that biofilm doesn't make collagen and other proteins. You don't get that from bacteria. None of these things hold up. Now, there is an interesting case of a man named Mark Armitage. He was the microscopist, meaning he was in charge of the microscopes for California State University in Northridge. He managed the biology department's electron and confocal microscopy. He had 30 technical articles already published on this. This is a fellow that knew his stuff. And he went on a dig and he uncovered one of the largest Triceratops horns ever found. But in examining it under microscope, he found soft tissue in the fossil. He published his findings about this and said that that was evidence of a recent sample, not 66 million years ago, minimum up to 240 some million years. So he said this was proof that the sample was not that old. He was fired from his job, even though Mary Schweitzer before him had found all these evidences of soft tissues. The thing that's not allowed is to conclude that maybe these things are not as old as we have said they are. That's just not entertained at all. There is a principle in science philosophy called Occam's razor, and it means that simpler explanations are generally better than more complex ones. So we've got soft tissues in dinosaurs. So if you find soft tissues in something, the simple explanation would be dinosaurs are not many millions of years old. But that is absolutely not even considered in the scientific community. That is verboten. And so they come up with maybe it was a mistake. No, it wasn't a mistake because they found hundreds of these now. Maybe geologic testing or biocontamination or biofilm from bacteria or shielding polymers, which we've already mentioned. And all of those get disqualified. But the scientific community, now they're going on like, well, this question doesn't need to be answered because they won't face the logical conclusion that the dinosaurs are really not that old. But they ignore that. So which one is more credible? Dinosaur fossils with soft tissues, that's blood cells, blood vessels, collagens, and other soft tissues, are from between 66 to 254 million years old. Or dinosaur fossils with soft tissues, blood vessels, blood cells, collagen, soft tissues are from only a few thousand years ago. Actually, that does make more sense. Well, Mary Schweitzer, when she found these things, was asked if she would submit her samples to carbon-14 testing, which is different than what she was doing. She was doing examining things under microscopes. And her answer was no, because she knew that dinosaur bones were too old to have any carbon-14 in them. She just refused to have them examined that way. But other people have had their dinosaur fossils tested. So a mosasaur bone and teeth from the Royal Institute of Natural Sciences of Belgium, carbon-14 dated at about 24,000 years old, 24,600 years old. And it was also found to have protein and collagen in it. And it's supposed to be anywhere from 100 to 64 million years old. Now, the way carbon-14 works is that we have carbon-14 in our bodies because we breathe it in from our atmosphere. There's a certain amount of the carbon in the atmosphere that has this slight radioactive element to it. And that biodegrades over time. While we're alive, we keep the same amount in our bodies as is in the environment, which is a known amount. Once we die and we no longer are breathing in new carbon-14, the amount of carbon-14 in our body begins to degrade and start to lose its radioactive quality to it. The absolute outside limit of how old something could be and still have detectable carbon-14 is approximately 60,000 years. Now, 60,000 and 64 million are a factor of 1,000. That's how much of a difference there is. 1,000 times older than what they're supposed to be. So another example of a dinosaur fossils that was dated with carbon-14 was from the University of Georgia, and it was found to be about 31,600 years old. And it's supposed to be 163 to 145 million years old. Now, the evolutionist rescue argument is there was contamination from other strata or in other measurement processes. And that would work, except that since that those first examples, there have been now over 100 dinosaurs tested, and they all show measurable amounts of carbon-14, which means that they cannot be older than 60,000 years. So you can see this visually. The little white block in the upper left corner represents a 60,000 year block. That's the oldest possible that any sample should have any detectable carbon-14. The yellow blocks are the youngest, absolute youngest ages that traditional science pegs the age of dinosaurs. And going to the bottom of the red blocks, that's the oldest traditional age. You can see that those two just don't match. There's no reconciling these two by just saying, oh, it's just a few years difference, no big deal. Nothing to look at here, folks. There is a problem. And we come back to Occam's razor. Simpler explanations are generally better than more complex ones. Simple answer would be that they're not that old. So, which is more credible? Dinosaur fossils are 66 million years to 254 million years old, routinely show readily detectable carbon-14. And now it's gotten to be that pretty much every dinosaur fossil that has been tested has shown to have it. Now, a lot of people are still holding out and say, I'm not going to have it tested because I know I can't have any, but they're just being stubborn about it. Or dinosaur fossils with readily detectable carbon-14 are really only thousands of years old. Well, the carbon-14 says, no, they're really only thousands of years old. Another question, dinosaur bone deposits. So as we've mentioned, dinosaurs are supposed to have lived in a long span of time in Earth's past history, and we find them in different strata as a result of that. It is presumed that they were made extinct by a meteor impact, which doesn't hold up to scientific scrutiny. But the interesting thing is, nearly every dinosaur boneyard worldwide appears to be the result of a catastrophic flood. The bones are all jumbled together, quite often broken, and then buried quickly in these big bone deposits. Evolutionists claim that local floods are the possible models for animals dying, but local floods don't explain the jumbled bones that are found in most dinosaur boneyards. Now, there's a thing called the Morrison Formation, and it's a distinctive sequence of Upper Jurassic sedimentary rock found in the western United States, which has been the most fertile source of dinosaur fossils in North America. And it covers an area of 1.5 million square kilometers, which is over 600,000 square miles, although only a tiny fraction is exposed and accessible to geologists and paleontologists. So it covers that big area, but there are other sediments on top of it, so people can't get to it to dig up dinosaur bones. But that's huge. Now, if you look at the map and see how big this Morrison Formation is, it is just massive. It's way too big for any cataclysm, like a local flood, anything short of a global flood with continent-sized tsunamis. But the massive dinosaur boneyards that are located all over the world are better answered by the catastrophic plate tectonics model for Noah's flood and the resultant mega tsunamis that swept over the whole Earth, which is more credible. Most dinosaur fossils are in massive boneyards of hundreds or thousands of square miles, but come from independent local floods? No, that just doesn't wash. Or most dinosaur fossils are in massive boneyards that were formed in the global catastrophe of the flood of Noah. Unfortunately for the scientists, that actually makes more sense, but they won't admit it. We looked at fossils, now let's look at coal. How did coal really form? Well, the traditional evolutionary theory is that prehistoric forests from the Carboniferous era grew on top of each other for millennia We're talking thousands of years, depositing layers of carbon that have since turned into coal. And this is called the Carboniferous forest, and it supposedly grew on top of itself for hundreds or thousands of years and accumulated. So this is the model. The trees keep growing on top of one another, and then after they die, it gets compressed into something called lignite. Then eventually that even gets compressed more and becomes coal. But underneath all of those, the original forest and underneath the lignite and underneath the coal should be what we call fossil soil, where the first trees started to grow. And then the other trees were growing on top of the collective biomass there, but there still had to be an original fossil soil there. And fossil soil would be different than other deposits. The problem is, if that's how all coal was made at the bottom of each original forest, and therefore under all subsequent coal deposits, there should be fossil soils. And there aren't. Fossil soils are hardly ever found under coal seams. What we find instead is typically a huge layer of coal separated by solid rock without fossil soils under any of the coal seams. Then another layer of coal without fossil under it. And these layers fit the model of the global tsunamis, sweeping off the massive pre-flood forests better than the traditional swamp model. Now, if these massive layers were deposited, vegetation on top of vegetation, rotting and decomposing, when we find recognizable vegetation, it should be half rotted. But that's not what we find. Instead, what is found is typically whole plant pieces that are broken, splintered, or shredded, not half rotted. The ends are snapped, not the rounded edges we would expect from half rotted wood, like they tell us in the traditional geologic model. So look at the edges. Those are not the signs of a piece of vegetation that is slowly rotting in a bog. Those are the signs of a piece of vegetation that is torn and shredded. And carbonized plant remains are always found as fragments and never as half rotted. And the same is true, most recognizable carbonized vegetation is found. The leaves would be very susceptible to rotting, but these leaves did not have time to rot before being preserved in sediment. And the arrangement of the leaves also suggests a quick entombment in sediment. So to kind of summarize here, is coal formed slowly or fast? If the coal formed slowly over generations of growth, you would expect no whole wood, but at best half-rotted vegetation. You would expect continuous layers of vegetation without interruptions. You would expect fossil soils under coal layers for the original plant growth to start, and you would expect it to be free of foreign rocks in the middle of the vegetation layers. But this is not the way coal is found. So the creation model for coal is that pre-Diluvian forests were swept off in repeated mega tsunamis that constituted the flood. And the forest masses were deposited and covered with other sediments. This is why there's no fossil soils under the coal deposits. So, which is more credible? Coal formed from layers of forest that grew on top of each other without any fossil soils over and over again? Or coal resulted as a massive pre-flood forests were violently swept off and deposited by successive tsunamis in a global flood. Now, there's a thing called polystrate fossils. Polystrate fossils are fossilized tree trunks that extend through multiple sediment strata. They're found worldwide in the eastern United States, eastern Canada, England, France, Germany, Australia, often associated with coal-bearing strata. Now, normally we'd be told that layers of sediment were formed over hundreds, if not thousands of years. But then how can they explain this? A tree trunk existing through so many layers of sediment that should have taken hundreds of years minimum to deposit. Any tree trunk would have decomposed long before those layers could accumulate. And that's what are called polystrate tree fossils. Polystrate meaning they go through multiple strata. They represent just too many layers of strata for that explanation to hold up. This trunk is extending through at least 63 layers that should have taken a minimum of hundreds of years to create according to the traditional geologic model. Early samples of polystrate trees were found in coal seams. Some logs measured over 30 feet in length. And these are, like I said, these are not isolated things. They're found all over the world. It's more obvious that these layers were put down quickly, that these strata didn't take dozens or hundreds or thousands of years, but were put down quickly. And that's how these trunks got entombed in the strata and preserved as a single trunk fossil. And these have been known for a long time, and they can't be explained away as isolated anomalies that don't matter. Instead, they show that the model of strata being laid down slowly over centuries doesn't fit what we actually find. Evolutionists' rescue argument is the trees were partially buried by sediments and continued to grow as more sediments accumulated. Problem one, these trees continued to live as sediments built up over hundreds or thousands of years? That doesn't wash. Or problem two, there typically are not roots found under these polystrate tree fossils. They're the trunks, but no roots. So that means they couldn't have been living and growing while sediments accumulated. Now, people didn't know how this could happen until in 1980, many of these questions got answered with the eruption of Mount St. Helens in Washington state. The eruption was mostly horizontal instead of vertical. I want you to look at the mountain and then a picture taken from the same vantage point after the explosion. See how the whole top of the mountain is gone. And see how the lake, this is called Spirit Lake, the blast from the eruption blasted millions of trees off the sides of the mountain there. And they ended up in Spirit Lake and floated there for many years. And then after a few years, the trees began to get waterlogged, and their bottom ends, being bigger, sank, changing the trees to near vertical in angle. And many of those trees have since sunk to the bottom and are now being covered by layers of sediment. And many will, no doubt, become future polystrate fossils. Here's the process. The trees are snapped off in a catastrophe, like a flood, or in this case, a volcanic eruption. They float on the water. After a time, the trees get waterlogged. The bigger ends sink first. Then those trees sink to the bottom. And then over time, sediments build up before the trees can rot. Mount St. Helens has proven how polystrate trees can form, how quickly sediment layers can form, that sediments do not take hundreds or thousands and certainly not millions of years to form. Which one is more credible? Polystrate trees extend through hundreds or thousands of years of strata without rotting or weathering away. I'm sorry, that's just not a very plausible idea. Or polystrate trees were buried by multiple layers of sediment in quick succession in a massive flood catastrophe. Yeah, now that we've seen what happened at Mount St. Helens, that is a much more plausible idea. And scientists are starting to have to admit it too. So here's another interesting thing in the fossil record. It's something called the Great Unconformity. This is a chart that you see typically in textbooks all over the place explaining the geologic timetable. But this is not how the fossil record really is. Often the order of strata are mixed up, or fossils that supposedly belong in different strata are found together. This is kind of an imaginary thing that is fed to us as the timetable of Earth's history. Down at the bottom, we have in the Cambrian layer something called the Cambrian explosion, where all of a sudden, in the fossil record, practically all major animal phyla appear all at once. And so there's the example of the different kinds of animal phyla, and they all appear all at once in the Cambrian record. without any ancestors. In science, we have a classification system. We have the domain, we have the kingdom animals, we had the phylum Chordata, meaning they have a spinal cord. Then the class Mammalia, meaning they're mammals. And then the order Carnivora, meaning they're meat eaters. And then the family Canidae, meaning they're basically canines or dogs that of that family. And then the genus Vulpes, meaning they're a wolf, and then the particular species Vulpes vulpes to show this particular animal, the red fox. This is the typical taxonomic classification. It's how we organize all of the animals that we know about. The problem is, in the Cambrian era, we have all these new creatures, and this is now not just the phyla, which is fairly high up, but the genus, which is much farther down. Each of these are a genus of new creatures that all of a sudden appear in the fossil record. Before that, there are no complex animals whatsoever in the fossil record. And not only that, none of these animals have any ancestors in the fossil record. How did they get to be that complex? We're told that animals evolved from simple to complex, but that's not what the fossil record shows. Here we have all of a sudden very complex life appearing, boom, from the get-go in the Cambrian era. There's no sign of preceding evolutionary ancestors. There's living counterparts found today with no evolution, so some of the creatures that were alive way back then are still alive now, and they look just the same. And some fossils have soft tissues, which again is supposed to be impossible. Not just dinosaurs that are having soft tissues, it's a lot of other things that are being found with soft tissues. And considering their supposed age, that's really quite an outlandish statement. So here we have from Wikipedia the definition of the Cambrian explosion. And notice the part that's highlighted. When a sudden radiation of complex life occurred and practically all major animal phyla started appearing in the fossil record. Now, that's from Wikipedia. This is not a creationist claim, and it is the biggest conundrum in geology and fossils and paleontology because it doesn't fit their model. It just doesn't fit. And it says, before early Cambrian diversification, most organisms were relatively simple, composed of individual cells or small multicellular organisms, occasionally organized into colonies. So, big difference between what was before the Cambrian era and all of a sudden in the Cambrian era. And the boundary between those two, between the Cambrian era, which would be represented in this case by the dark brown layer, and the pre-Cambrian stuff, is a boundary that's called the Great Unconformity. It's not an isolated anomaly. It's seen in Europe, in Africa, and Asia, just like one would expect from a world that was shaped by a worldwide flood. What creationists are saying is that everything above the great unconformity is flood related or post flood, at least in terms of time, and everything under the great unconformity is pre flood material. So, which is more credible? Life evolved from simple to complex in spite of the Cambrian explosion, showing that most major phyla appeared suddenly in the fossil record. Now, the geologists and paleontologists don't dispute that that happened, that the Cambrian explosion is what I've said. They don't dispute that. They just won't admit that it means that their model doesn't hold up. Or complex life appears suddenly in the fossil record because all life was created at the beginning of the Earth. That's looking a lot more credible. It's not just the Cambrian explosion, but there are repeated sudden appearances in the fossil record. The layer right above the Cambrian is called the Ordovician. And in the Ordovician, there's another, what they call biodiversification event, and it even has a little acronym for short, is known as GOBI. And it had a fourfold increase in genera, a double increase in orders, and a triple increase of families. So all of them without ancestors in the fossil record. So again, so you can see the last three things down at the bottom, genus, family, and order, are all multiplied in the Ordovician layer, which is the one above the Cambrian. Again, all without previous ancestors in the fossil record. And then other sudden appearances. Winged insects are supposedly from 325 million years ago in the Carboniferous era. Marine reptiles all of a sudden suddenly appear in around 200 to 270 million years ago. Dinosaurs appear somewhere around 230, 250, whatever. Mammals from 225 million years ago. Turtles from 220 million years ago. Snakes all of a sudden appear in the fossil record at 167 million years ago. Birds suddenly appear in 150 million years ago. And bats suddenly appear at 52 to 56 million years ago. And how many of those had fossil ancestors? None of them. None of them. In the world of mammals, each of the 32 orders of mammals appears suddenly in the fossil record with no ancestors. And even among dinosaurs, for instance, the pterosaurs, which are the flying dinosaurs, there are no intermediates in the fossil record between any of the pterosaurs and their supposed non-flying dinosaur ancestors. Here's what we're told. We're told that life started simple and it began to branch off and get more complex and more complex and more complex. This basic tree model. But that's not what the fossil record really shows. What the fossil record really shows is that creatures appear suddenly in the fossil record, either with living to the current times or going extinct, doesn't matter. They appear suddenly, and they appear to not have any precursors or ancestors that evolved them into that shape. An evolutionist who was fairly famous a few decades ago, a man by the name of George Gaylord Simpson, and there you can see his credentials. He's very well respected and was definitely an evolutionist. He had published 18 books on evolution and on taxonomy and on zoology. He makes this admission. This regular absence of transitional forms is not confined to mammals, but is an almost universal phenomenon, as has long been noted by paleontologists. So the fossil record does not show evolution. It shows things suddenly appear. They either live to today or they die out, but they don't evolve from one thing to another. That's what the fossil record actually shows. We have a lot of creatures that are unchanged from today. We can see their fossil remains supposedly from eons ago, unchanged to today. So there's been no evolution whatsoever. So again, the Darwinian theory says progress from one organism to another, but what the fossil record actually shows is sudden appearances, then stasis, meaning things stay the same, they don't evolve, or they die out, or they're alive today, one or the other, but they don't evolve. Which is more credible? The fossil record doesn't show progress from simple to complex, but evolution happened anyway. Or the fossil record shows complex life appearing suddenly, then continuing today or dying out. Oh, what about evolution between major kinds of things? So if evolution happened, then surely we should have evidence of some sort of intermediate thing between, for instance, invertebrates and vertebrates, between insects and arachnids, between fish and amphibians, between reptiles and birds, between reptiles and mammals. So let's look at those. We've got invertebrates versus vertebrates. So basically, invertebrates are animals that don't have a spinal cord or bones on the inside. If they have hard parts, they're on the outside. So those would be crustaceans, starfish, a lot of different creatures. That's how they're built. They don't have bones on the inside. And then we have the other kind, the vertebrates, the kind that have a vertebra or a spine, and they typically have bones on the inside and softer parts to the outside. But there's no evidence of any transition from invertebrates to vertebrates anywhere in the fossil record. None. And that's a pretty big division of creatures, but there's no transitions. So you look at the classification of animals. Remember, we talked about over on the left, those without a backbone, insects, crustaceans, spiders, all sorts of little creepy crawly things. And then animals with backbones are things that we're more familiar with mostly. So let's consider what it would take to transition. Insects and arachnids, we call them all bugs, but they're different. How would they evolve from one to another? Well, there's actually be quite a bit of difference. Insects have 6 legs. Arachnids have 8 legs. Insects have a separate head and thorax, but arachnids have a combined cephalothorax. Insects have life stages at pupa, then metamorphosis, and then at the adult stage. But arachnids just have one body and they molt the skin of that and grow bigger and bigger to accommodate their growing. Insects have antenna and can have wings, and the arachnids have no antenna and no wings. And then the vision is different too. Insects have 2 compound eyes, and arachnids have 6 to 12 eyes of a different kind. So there's a lot of differences between insects and arachnids. And nowhere in the fossil record do we have anything that is a transition from insect to arachnid. Nowhere. Okay, here's another possible transition, transitioning from fish to amphibians. Now, here's a typical model and things you have to remember. If there is supposed initial pressure on the creature to change so that it can survive, that pressure can't kill the subject at each of its stages of changing. It's got to be able to still survive, presumably eons, to evolve from one creature to another. And that change would take place over centuries or at least hundreds of generations. And it can't have a disadvantage to get food or evade predators at any of those stages, otherwise it wouldn't survive and it wouldn't continue to evolve. And it has to have appropriate mates at all stages of change. It has to be able to, in the case of going from fish to amphibian, to breathe without gills. So that would be a big anatomical change. And to find and adapt to new food and to evade new predators. So all of those would be necessary for evolving from fish to amphibian. And a lot of those principles apply to any kind of evolution. Now, there have been some candidates that have been proposed to be a transitional form between fish and amphibians, but they have since been examined by other evolutionists and reclassified and said, no, they're not really transitional forms after all. So they either end up either as fish or amphibians and no transitional forms. These conditions would be true for all transitional forms. What about transitioning from reptile to bird? When I was growing up, when I was your age, the Archaeopteryx was proclaimed to be the missing link between dinosaurs and birds because it had teeth. That's it. It had teeth. Therefore, it was some sort of dino bird. But then they found that true birds were living that actually predated the Archaeopteryx. So therefore, the Archaeopteryx could not be the ancestors of true birds because there were true birds that were older than that, according to their own findings. Well, the fact that they had teeth didn't prove evolution any more than the fact that different creatures have the ability to fly. We have birds, we have bats, we have insects, we have pterosaurs. We know they all flew, but there's no presumption that they evolved from one to another. They're all quite independently having the ability to fly. A great deal of emphasis has been placed on the discovery of feathers in certain fossils, claimed to be carnivorous dinosaurs, and they're all found in one little province in China. This has been presented as some sort of slam dunk proof of evolution. But who says that feathers in dinosaurs proves evolution? Most birds now have beaks, but some extinct birds, like Archaeopteryx, had teeth, and that didn't prove anything. So look at this. To evolved from reptile to bird, most don't have feathers on the reptile side, to all birds now do have feathers. Reptiles don't have a breastbone, but all birds do have a very large breastbone. Most reptiles will have small forearms. To birds, which have very significant forearms, which are their wings. Those are very significant in a bird. Reptiles are not warm-blooded, to birds being definitely warm-blooded. Reptiles have a three-chambered heart. Birds have a four-chambered heart. Reptiles have sac lungs. Birds have bronchial lungs. Most reptiles have solid bones, and most birds have hollow bones. The pelvis is rotated forward in reptiles and rotated backwards in birds. Reptiles, most of them have teeth, and most birds have beaks, and most reptiles don't fly, and most birds do fly. To say that some dinosaur appears to have had feathers and therefore dinosaurs and birds are the same, or that this proves that birds evolved from dinosaurs, is to forget about a whole lot of other differences. And there are more differences between reptiles and birds than any of the other transitional forms we have or will discuss today. That really is a spurious argument. What about transitioning from reptile to mammal? Well, even there are some pretty big hurdles to cross. You have to change from scales to fur. You have to change from not warm-blooded to warm-blooded. You have to change from combined excretion. Remember, reptiles have combined excretion. They only have one opening, and it all comes out that opening. Or mammals have separate urine and feces, so those are separate organs involved in that. The reptiles give birth to offspring via an egg, whereas mammals have a placenta and live birth. That's a totally different way of creating new life. And reptiles have no milk for their offspring, and of course, mammals do have milk for their offspring. It's been a repeated pattern, and this has happened over and over again in the question of evolution versus creation. Evolutionists come up with these claims that they found a missing link for this. And these claims get a lot of publicity. Then the evolutionists re-examine the data, and then they reclassified those links, disproving the original claim. But then those claims are quietly removed from their official lists, but the old claims that have been disproven persist in modern media and in new books. So here's an example. The Pakicetus was first thought to be the missing link between reptiles and mammals. Now it's just believed to be an extinct cetacean, which is a mammal, definitely a mammal. It's still shown in textbooks as a viable candidate for a transitional form between reptile and mammal, even though it was evolutionists who agreed that it was not a traditional form, but an extinct cetacean. But this happened with every candidate that's supposed to be a missing link. So when you look at all these different possible transitions, we don't find any that actually have held up to their own examination. So the gaps that exist in the animal kingdom now, we have turtles being different than fish, them being different than amphibians, them being different than birds, them being different from whales, them being different from little mammals like rabbits, then from primates, then from mollusks. Those same differences are found in the fossil record. There's been no transitions from any of those major kinds found anywhere in the fossil record. Charles Darwin, this is something that bothered him clear back when he was doing his stuff. Remember, this is in 1859, so we're talking more than 150 years ago. He said, firstly, why, if species have descended from other species by insensibly fine gradations, do we not everywhere see innumerable transitional forms? Why is not all of nature in confusion instead of species being, as we see them, well defined? But as by this theory innumerable transitional forms must have existed, why do we not find them embedded in the countless numbers in the crust of the earth? Well, we could say, yeah, well, in Darwin's time, there hadn't been enough scientific exploration. there hadn't been enough fossils found. We can't make that excuse now. How many fossils have been found and documented? Again, this is right off Google. To date, scientists worldwide have unearthed and cataloged some 200 million large fossils and billions of small fossils, and yet no transitional forms anywhere. So, which is more credible? Evolution took place from one phylum and species to another without a single example in the billions of fossils found. Or different phyla and species appear suddenly with no precursors. Creatures survive to the present day or not, as the fossil record shows. Again, evolution loses. Now, I told you about the Morrison Formation. There's a particular part of the Morrison Formation called the Hell Creek Formation, and it's a huge dinosaur boneyard that extends over 4 states and into Canada. And here is a poster you can get of all the creatures that are found in the Hell Creek Formation with pictures of the actual remains as well as silhouettes of the creatures that they are. Now, I've taken them and colored them so that you can see the red ones are land creatures and the blue ones are sea creatures. And the ones that remain in black could be either on land or on sea. So we can just ignore those. How could both those be found in the same geologic formation? They don't live together, and yet that's how their bones are found. How does that make any sense? Just to summarize, we have saltwater sharks and clams and freshwater turtles and amphibians plus T-Rex all buried together. Nothing in traditional geologists can explain that, but it fits the worldwide flood model perfectly. So, which is more credible? Fossils from Hell Creek Formation mixed land dwellers with aquatic creatures, which were made from slow deposition of sediments like all fossils. Or Hell's Creek Formation of fossils of land and aquatic creatures were killed in a worldwide flood of Noah and deposited together. Well, we've covered a lot of things here. Unfortunately, too many in the science community say, my mind is made up. Don't try to confuse me with facts. What we're dealing with here is something called cognitive dissonance. And this is a principle in psychology. It says when a person holds a core belief so strong that when they are presented with new evidence that goes against that belief, it is not accepted because protecting the core belief is so important. They will rationalize, ignore, or deny anything that challenges the core belief. Now, historically, scientists have accused creationists of doing this, but it's becoming increasingly clear that it's the scientists that won't accept the new data and that won't accept the logical conclusions of what that data provides. Back to our original question, which one is real science? The data must conform to the theory. If it does not, adjust or just ignore the data. Or the theory must conform to the data. If it does not, adjust or abandon the theory. Are scientists supposed to follow their beliefs or follow the evidence? I think we all know they're supposed to follow the evidence. The conclusion, the fossil record does not reflect the evolutionary scenario. Instead, the fossil record reflects the creation and the flood of Noah. So here's a little summary. Fossils dated from strata they are found in, strata dated from the fossils that are in it. Doesn't work. If we were flooded today, we'd find different creatures in different strata, so that doesn't prove anything in and of itself. Soft tissues are found in dinosaur fossils. That's impossible if they're millions of years old. Over 100 dinosaur fossils have carbon-14. Also impossible if millions of years old. Dinosaur fossils are in jumbled boneyards all over the world as if from a global flood. The Morrison Formation of dinosaur fossils covers over 600,000 square miles. Coal deposits lack fossil soils under, and they have broken vegetation, not half-rotted. Carbon-14 is routinely found in coal. Impossible if it's supposed to be millions of years old. Polystrate fossils, trees extending through thousands of years of sediment. Impossible. The eruption of Mount St. Helens shows how polystrate fossils can form quickly. The Cambrian explosion, most major phyla appear suddenly in the fossil record with no predecessors. There's no evolutionary tree anywhere in the fossil record. Species appear, they either live to today or they become extinct. And there are no transitional forms even between major kinds, just like they are now. And the Hell Creek Formation has T-Rex with both fresh and saltwater fossils together. As we said at the beginning, evolution and creation are both religious beliefs, but which one fits the data best? We've been told that evolution is a fact, that it's the only logical conclusion, but evolution doesn't fit the data. As we've just seen, the creation fits the data better. This was our 5th video, and we can see that the data does not fit the evolutionary model in any of our videos so far, and that the data actually fits the flood and creation model much better. So next time, we'll talk about the supposed missing links for animals. So thank you very much. I hope you like this.